Welcome back. It has been 3 days since the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump's life, and for many people, the images are still fresh. Tens of thousands of Trump supporters attended the outdoor rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. They included families with children who saw the horror firsthand, and even more people watched it unfold on TV and online. While the former president and current Republican presidential nominee fortunately survived, the trauma of that day could have lasting effects on those who witnessed it. Joining us now to talk about this and more is Allison Ricciardi, a licensed mental health counselor and founder of CatholicTherapist.com. Allison, always so good to be with you. Obviously, what happened on Saturday at the event in Pennsylvania was unexpected and probably seemed really surreal to a lot of folks that were there. That said, how do traumatic events like this typically affect people? And does it have a direct impact right away, or is it something that maybe is felt a little bit later after the shock wears off?
Well, it can be both, but for many people, it does kind of continue later, because what happens when we experience a traumatic event, which is something outside of our normal range of human experience that overwhelms our ability to cope, it really gets encoded more in the amygdala of the brain, the fight or flight center. So it is important to get help right away, to talk about the experience, particularly, with your children, if you're struggling with it, to talk it out with somebody, to get those feelings out, to reassure your children, because otherwise it just gets stuck there. And, it can really have long-term ramifications. And obviously for the people who are there, there's going to be a much greater impact, than those of us who watched it, from afar after the fact on TV. When it was unfolding, nobody knew what was going to happen or, when it was going to end. So that's a very, very traumatic experience.
Absolutely. Now, so what advice would you give to parents, when it comes to talking to their children about this event?
Well, I think this was a very compelling thing to try to figure out and to watch, but it's been played ad nauseum on TV. And really, we need to be mindful of our children, to limit their exposure. We don't need to have it on 24/7. But I think to also, monitor signs of distress in children, listen to them, ask them questions. If they start to, if they ask you questions, ask them what they're feeling. What have they understood in terms of what happened? And how can you make them feel safe again? I think, for us as Catholics, a huge takeaway of this was really the aspect of divine intervention, because that was really a last minute head tilt, and there's a lot of connections with the anniversary of Fatima, the shooting of John Paul II, which he survived as well. So I think as Catholics, this is a great opportunity to talk about the power of prayer, the power of, just trusting in God, even though sometimes bad things can happen like that.
Yeah, and that's such an important, point to make there. Let's talk just a little bit more about that, how our Catholic faith can help us process something like this and make sense out of a senseless act of violence.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that we do need to talk to our kids, and even to, amongst ourselves. How are we processing our anger? I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now, and a lot of people are very, very stressed out. And there's been a lot of very inflammatory rhetoric on both sides because people are so angry. So we need to look at that from a faith perspective also, to remember that God is always in control, and that we always need to have recourse to prayer, prayers of protection, prayers for the conversion of our, so-called enemies. That we really need to recognize that this is not a battle of flesh and blood. This is a battle of powers and principalities. So, to kind of take that faith perspective, I think, is really important. And if you are struggling or your children are struggling, reach out on CatholicTherapist.com for somebody who shares your faith, that can integrate that faith perspective, because that's really where our healing comes from, right? That we need to be dependent on God. We need to trust in the power of prayer, in His power to protect us, and in His power to bring good out of the terrible things that may happen in the world.
And Allison, so good to get your insights as always. We really appreciate it. God bless you.
You too, Tracy.